Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to class. Today we are going to talk about the phenomena of mixing and switching of languages. How a bilingual or a multilingual speaker tend to mix from one language, items from one language with the other language. What are the reasons why we do so? What is the outcome of such tendencies, and what are the sociolinguistic implications of these tendencies? What are the settings in which we mix from one language to into the other, or what are the contexts in which we do so? Is it normal? Is it natural? Is it regular? These are the things, and these are the questions that we are going to take up in this class today. So, you are familiar with the concept of bilingualism and multilingualism. So, bilingualism is a phenomenon where a speaker has access to two different linguistic resources, right? The person has ability to use two languages with equal ease. The degree of competence and proficiency in second language may vary because of other sociolinguistic and personal factors, but the fact is that the person has access to two different languages. And what happens when you have access to two different languages? What happens when you speak, when you do conversation, when you are engaged in conversation? How these two linguistic resources coordinate and mix? Is it deliberate? Is it spontaneous? Do we do it with some agenda? Does it happen on its own? There are multiple questions that we can ask, and so mixing and switching, right, is a very natural, productive and regular phenomena of a bilingual person, a multilingual person. If you look at Indian linguistic ecology, where we have so many languages, right, and all these speech communities are in close contact with each other. Their contact has survived and sustained for hundreds of years, right? So, what is the implication? What is the result of these long contacts? We have a lot of borrowing from one language to the other language. We have a lot of items borrowed from one language to the other language, concepts borrowed from one language to the other language, and these borrowings are not in isolation. Sometimes we have a whole package borrowed from one language, the whole concept borrowed from one language, and all the lexical items and words associated with these concepts are also borrowed. But we are not going to talk about borrowing from one language to the other. We are going to talk about the tendency of a bilingual speaker or a multilingual speaker who frequently mixes two languages or three languages, right? In literature, it is called code mixing and code switching, right? We have to understand that code mixing and code switching are natural phenomena. They are natural phenomena. They are not deliberate and artificial. It is very natural phenomena, and this is done for maximum communicability. The ultimate objective of language is to communicate, and such mixings and switchings are done to achieve maximum communicability. That's the reason why these bilinguals or multilinguals mix. It's also beautiful to see that how this mental faculty called language, or access to two different languages, right, with a sometimes single semantic system. So, where the compound bilingual will have two sets of structural systems, but one semantic system. A coordinate bilingual may have, two different semantic systems and two different structural systems, right. Doesn't matter whether he is a compound bilingual, she is a compound bilingual, or coordinate bilingual, or subordinate bilingual, early bilingual, late bilingual, or you have native like competency in both the languages, or you have successive bilingualism concept, and doesn't matter the degree of your competence and proficiency. What matters is the tendency of mixing, and we call it a creative outcome. Why do we call it creative? Because the language user or the speaker has ability to appropriately mix these two codes without interruption in meaning, and that's the beautiful thing about it. So, mixing and switching may be looked at, may be viewed as a creative outcome of a bilingual or multilingual mind. So, today we are going to talk about some aspects of it. So, the study of code switching and code mixing has two directions. We can look at code mixing and code switching from two perspectives. One is a structural perspective and the other is sociolinguistic perspective, right. When we look at a structural perspective, we look at the patterns of mixing, how in a single sentence items from one language is brought in and inserted, right. That is called insertion. Then another pattern could be alternation. So, how a grammatical item or a lexical item is borrowed or brought in from language B and alternated in language A, right. The third is congruent lexicalization. So, how a grammatical element and a lexical item can be placed in language A from language B and in situ position, and how they are mixed. Mixing happens within a sentence. So, we say code mixing when we have mixing within two full stops within a sentence, so intra-sentential level. But switching refers to, again switching is also mixing, but the level is higher, at higher level, that is called discourse level, where you bring in sentences from language B into language A discourse. So, you are having an extended conversation, and we frequently bring in sentences from full sentence from the other language. So, I have 2-3 sentences in Hindi, and then I bring in 1 or 2 sentences from English, and I continue my discourse, my conversation. So, switching happens beyond sentence level at higher level called discourse, and mixing happens within a sentence intrasentential level. The sociolinguistic approach to such mixing and switching looks at them as a discourse phenomenon, focusing its attention on questions such as how social meaning is created in code switching event and what specific function it serves. Now, there can be two theoretical positions. In one, scholars believe, early research, if you look at Bloomfield and other people, it is believed that you have a deficit. So, a bilingual or a multilingual person has some deficit, and the person finds no equivalent of a particular concept in language A, which is the native language of the person. So, the person brings in such lexical items and linguistic units from language B and compensates it. So, this whole mixing and switching happens because of deficit in language A. So, this is deficit hypothesis. Bloomfield was the one who pointed out, and many other scholars. Other scholars believe that no, it is not a deficit thing. In fact, a bilingual augments linguistic resources. So, it is augmentation hypothesis where a bilingual willingly and creatively brings in items from lexical items and linguistic units from language B to language A to make the communication more effective for maximum communicability, right. And there are certain social factors, linguistic factors which are responsible for this choice, where the speaker or the user brings in items from linguistic items and lexical items from language B. So, it is augmentation system, augmentation thing, it augments. So, the speaker has a very good command, fairly good command and access to two linguistic resources, and given these 2 or 3 or more linguistic resources at disposal, the speaker or the user of language has free will to bring in items from one language to the other, right. And why he or she does so? To achieve maximum communicability, to connect to the audience and achieve maximum communicability, which is the ultimate goal of language, right. So, there are scholars, I will not list the quotations and catalog the quotations from other scholars, but there are certain quotations and certain quotes we should be familiar. Certain scholars who have profound impact on such works on such phenomena, right. So, one of them is Gumpers. He says, switching is, quote switching is juxtaposition within the same speech exchange of passage of speech belonging to two different grammatical systems or subsystems. So, they are simply units are juxtaposed in a structure, right. The units belong to two different systems, but the chunk the linguistic chunk is one. In that we have two units brought from two different languages, they are juxtaposed and a whole sentence or a discourse is created. Okay. If you look at Mayers and Scotton 1993 2002, code mixing refers to the embedding of linguistic units such as phrases, words and morpheme of one language into the utterance of another language. Like file ko, file is an English word, ko, case marker of Hindi. Chapatis, chapati is Hindi word and the plural marker s from English. So, embedding, right. Now, the question is, why do we mix? Question is, why mixing or switching happen in natural languages? Why a bilingual or a multilingual person has this tendency of mixing? Hoffman, right, lists a number of reasons for bilingual or multilingual persons to switch or mix their languages. And what are these? Number 1, this is so number 1, interjection. Number 2, quoting somebody else. Number 3, expressing group identity. Number 4, because of real lexical need. Next, talking about a particular topic. Repetition used for clarification. Being emphatic about something to soften or strengthen, request or command. Intention of clarifying the speech content for interlocutor, and to exclude other people when a comment is intended for only a limited audience. And there can be many reasons. What do they mean? So, first and foremost, of course, if I am quoting from some source, I tend to quote originally from the source without translating it into the language of my conversation. So, of course, quotations are the reasons. So, when you quote, we have tendency of quoting from original source in original sentence without changing or translating it. So, this is one reason, right. Sometimes identity is a big issue. When you want to identify or express your solidarity with the audience, you try to bring in expressions and linguistic units from the languages of the audience. In India, mixing of Indian languages with English is very rampant and prolific. Tamil English, Kannada English, Marathi English, Hindi English, Punjabi English. So, such hybridity is very common and mixing is very common. An average educated Indian who has some exposure to English, she may not be excellent in English, but some exposure in English, right. The peer pressure or the issues of identity also forces to mix English words just to reflect and express that you are elite and educated, because English is considered as a language of social upward mobility. So, that elitist attitude or the urge to be considered as educated, we have this tendency of bringing in a lot of English words in any language that we speak, no matter you are speaking Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Hindi, Punjabi, Marathi, Bangla, whatever you are speaking, does not matter, English word. So, Hindi and English mixing, Tamil and English mixing, Punjabi and English mixing is very, very common, very natural, right. It also underlines the peer pressure and identity. So, you want to show solidarity, sometimes to express that you are educated, right. We do it. Sometimes it is the theme or the topic that determines when and how we mix or switch. For example, let us say taboo words which are not expressed and shared in public, but we feel comfortable talking about taboo themes in English. So, even if I am a Tamil speaker, I will deliberately bring in that English equivalent of that taboo word, and to avoid embarrassment or to shed my inhibition and to reach out to the audience. So, I bring in that. Sometimes if I am talking about some serious intellectual topics where my training education has been in English and I am speaking in Tamil or Telugu or Hindi, I have a normal and natural flair of expressing and talking about those topics in English. So, I do that, right. Sometimes it is also very exclusive idea where if you want others not to understand what you are saying and you intend only a few people to understand or a limited audience to understand what you are saying, we do it deliberately. Certain portions or certain words that you want only limited audience to understand and exclude the rest, we switch, right, to other language or specifically English in India. Sometimes emphasize for to place our major thrust and emphasis on what we are saying, we repeat, and that repetition happens in English. For example, close the door, darwaza band karo, or So, the same thing is said twice, but not in the same code. So, it also does not sound repeated, and at the same time it underlines the emphasis. So, to place emphasis on what you are saying, sometimes we say the same thing twice, once in your language A and once in language B. So, repetition. So, quoting somebody, repeating what you want to say, but you do not want to see obviously repeated. So, you change the code and you use code B to repeat, translate and repeat the same thing that you already said in language A. We do that. Sometimes it may be possible that you do not find an equivalent concept or word in the language you are speaking. So, you have to bring in from the other language. So, you may not find an equivalent word and you bring in from other language. So, you compensate that deficit. So, it is a compensatory mechanism where if you lack some concepts and words in language A, you compensate it or bring in from language B. May be possible there are certain topics, certain themes you are familiar and comfortable in talking about in language B. So, even if you are talking in language A, you bring in expressions and words and utterances and sentences from language B to emphasize and express yourself in a better way, right. Sometimes for clarifications. So, you may find that what you said is not clear to some of your audiences. Then what you do? You try to compensate that with other code, with a belief that that repetition and the repeated representation of what you already said will make them understand. So, for clarifications also we do it. And sometimes some politeness, out of some politeness, or sometimes for out of conversational needs, we feel like bringing in expressions from language B. There are multiple reasons, identity issue for that matter. If you look at Bollywood songs, let's take some example. Bollywood songs these days, and not only Bollywood song, look at entire songs, all kinds of songs. In folk songs also these days, I find a lot of English words mixed, right. And they are not random, they are not non-volitional, they are volitional and they have a pattern, right. Look at, for example, conversation and sentences related to technology. These days, for example, download, upload, save, right. Look at Hindi compound, download karna, upload karna, save karna, surf karna, search karna. These are all compound verbs where the lexical element or the content comes from English word, and karna, that is the Hindi word, and they together make a compound verb. It is a very, very productive phenomena, right. So, now why people do so? We have already described in detail. Sometimes, I read Janet Holmes says on the issue of code switching, right, people may switch code within a speech event to discuss a particular topic, right. Similarly, Kachru believes that other than language contact, there are functional or pragmatic reasons for the use of code switching or code mixing. He assumes that bilingual or multilingual speakers are consciously aware of their use of CM and CS. They deliberately code switch when shifting register, when they want to shift register and identity, right. So, there are multiple factors, but the underlying point is that mixing or switching is a beautiful phenomenon of a bilingual mind that represents the accessibility and proficiency of a person or language user who can draw comfortably and creatively from two distinct linguistic sources. This happens with a pattern, and this happens spontaneously. There are other motivating factors why they happen, possibly for expressing solidarity and your identity. You want to mix, or you want to switch from one language to the other. Sometimes if you want to exclude a set of audience from things that you don't want them to know, so it's like a secret code where you switch and mix to keep them excluded from your conversation. Sometimes it can be non-availability of the concepts and the topics on which you are talking, and you compensate it by bringing in linguistic and lexical items from other language. Sometimes it is direct quote. So, you are quoting a source where you don't want to translate and change the structure. So, you quote verbatim as it is in the other language. At times when you feel that you need to emphasize and say something emphatically, you tend to get an equivalent in other language. So, you say the same thing and then you repeat. So, for repetitions and placing emphasis on that, we deliberately do so. There are multiple factors, right? But what we have to remember is this is not impurity, because we do have this tendency of labeling it to impurity, and in the background of your mind it is believed that because the person lacks an equivalent word or a phrase or a clause or a concept in language A, he or she tries to compensate it with language B. That is not the case. It is an augmentation of two resources where the speaker has equal accessibility and brings in items from other language in language 1, from language 2, to make sure that he or she achieves the communication goals. This phenomenon is very natural, normal, and it does not amount to impurity. Nothing called pure language. If you look at language, human language, it is always in a flux. It is dynamic concept, it is fluid. So, you do not know where the language boundary ends, right. For example, if you look at the history of borrowing, or if you do a detailed analysis of, let us say, lexical items in a language, you happen to find that many of them are borrowed from one language to the other, and after borrowing they have sustained, assimilated and neutralized. File, for that matter, in Hindi is a word. I do not know, I have not come across anyone so far in my life who has used any Hindi equivalent of file. We do not usually use it, and if deliberately you use document, now document is dastavej. Again, you say that this is a Hindi word, but actually this is not a Hindi word. Again, in Hindi it is not a Hindi word. So, it is borrowed from Perso-Arabic background, Perso-Arabic source. There are many words in Hindi, or many words in Tamil, many words in Marathi, many words in Punjabi, any language, take any language, we have a huge list of borrowed words, borrowed concepts, borrowed items, right. So, but when they are stabilized, stabilized and neutralized and used as this word from the same language, I mean, even the speakers, native speakers do not realize they are neutralized and accepted to such an extent that you do not even realize. Now, road, for that matter, building, for that matter, park for that matter, garden for that matter. Look at all these words, right? We hardly find people using actual Hindi equivalent of these words. So, these words are borrowed and now neutralized, high frequency words. And in an unmarked speech event, we see these words frequently occurring without any conscious effort, because they come to you so naturally. So, that is borrowing, but code mixing, code switching is an individual bilingual, multilingual speech event where the speaker or the user deliberately uses, mixes and brings in linguistic items and sources from one language to the other for various regions, various social regions, various linguistic regions, and this is a very natural, productive and regular phenomenon. So, with this we finish this idea, and we will I request all of you to look at how speech events are happening around you. It does not matter what is your mother tongue, but you will see this tendency of mixing very common, and specifically if you are looking at your mother tongue and English mixing, it is still very common and natural and normal. What is the pattern? How do they mix? What are the contexts in which they mix? What is the idea behind mixing? How it impacts you? How it influences you? What kind of influence it has on you as a listener or as a participant in the communication, right? You can see it yourself. So, thank you very much, and we will continue discussing such issues in other class. Thank you.